Welcome to Unlayered. I'm your host, Saul, alongside my co host, Dave. And today we're going to be diving into the world of exchanges. We're speaking with Bartosz, the founder and CEO of Cube Exchange. And for those unfamiliar, Cube is a centralized exchange that's doing a few things differently than past centralized exchanges. Probably the most unique part of it is the multi party computation wallets to ensure that only users have access to their funds, but a ton of other advancements that they're making that Bartosz can jump into. And previously, before Cube, Bartosz was an engineer at Solana as well as on Wall Street at firms like Citadel, JP Morgan, BNP Paribas. So awesome to have you on today. Looking forward to this conversation. How's it going, Bartosz?
Yeah, pretty good. Thanks for having me. Super excited to chat with you guys.
Likewise, likewise. I guess give us an update on where things are at with Cube. I think there was obviously a big announcement at Breakpoint, and I believe you guys have launched. How's everything going?
Yeah, everything is going great. We are adding more users, more tokens, and excited for people to like finally start using the product. It has been like roughly 12 months since we started building originally, like right after the infamous time of like FTX. Um, so like really happy where we are right now. Some things were harder. I talked about it during Breakpoint, where like MPC was much harder, integrating it across multiple blockchains, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana. Definitely challenged our technical skills. Um, and then just like interacting with like external people, like onboarding people to be validators in the app chain and the MPC infrastructure and the market makers, just it's hard because you have a lot of stakeholders.
Right. And maybe that's actually a good place to start, which is how do exchanges traditionally handle custody, and where did you see this opportunity to reinvent how you guys do that with MPC?
Yeah. So traditionally, centralized exchanges, at least, in my opinion, at least from the tech perspective, they have very little to do with blockchain itself and the ethos of blockchain. Um, they usually have this like thin layer of like wallet infrastructure. Sometimes it's a bit bigger. They will have like cold storage and hot storage, but like ultimately they roll up all the funds into something that's called omnibus accounts. Um, and you could assume for all intents of purposes outside of security that it's like one wallet. You have like hot wallet where you put all the users' funds. Um, and at that point, the only interaction that you have with blockchain is really where you withdraw and deposit assets. But everything that's happening on the exchange is, let's call it off chain, but off blockchain as well. The blockchain doesn't know about any trades, doesn't know about who owns which assets. Maybe the only thing you know is like the total amount of assets from a given blockchain deposited to the exchange. But even that sometimes is not true because some exchanges would let you trade like synthetic assets that are not even connected to that blockchain. So um, that part is much closer to traditional finance than blockchain itself. And we wanted to change that by introducing this like infrastructure with the MPC compute like wallets that settle all the trades directly to layer ones, and each user has a dedicated address for each of their sub accounts on the exchange. And that's pretty unique and makes it a bit harder to build because now you need to manage all those wallets and how you settle and all of that. Where before that, it was just like if I traded with USAL, it's just an entry in the Postgres database.
Mhm. So, but isn't the challenge there? Obviously, Solana is a cheap blockchain to use, but basically any other chain, if you're settling directly to layer ones and going right in the wallet, wouldn't there be a ton of transaction costs there?
Yeah, so at worst, it will be the same as trading on a DEX in terms of fees. Um, but we are optimizing it a bit by batching transactions across the traders. So if we trade between three of us multiple times before the block is settled, that will be batched into a single like peer-to-peer settlement with the the difference between the assets.
can you just go into what exactly is centralized with Cube? Because if the users are holding their assets, yeah, can you just, because the way I see it is it's almost like a hybrid exchange. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's in some sense it's the level of decentralization is pretty close to what you would get from DYDX, and we took a lot of inspiration from how DYDX is set up. I think the team there did an amazing job with certain things. So the first thing and like one that people focus a lot is like the matching engine itself is centralized. We operate it when you create your orders and then the trades are matched. That's running on Cube servers. KYC infrastructure is centralized as well, and then the website itself and the DNS, all of that is centralized as well. And what's decentralized is the app chain that we have, the MPC infrastructure, and then the settlement part between the traders.
And can you just go a bit more into the KYC, how you're going about it? Because I know Backpack came out around the same sort of time, and they still haven't got, I believe, KYC in Europe, in the UK, in America. I think that's right. Whereas your exchange seems to allow this. So, have you been able to overcome issues which other exchanges are facing?
I actually think it's pretty similar in terms of it all depends like on your licenses and where you think you're comfortable like having users from. So for example, United States, you cannot use Cube. And like UK, I think you cannot use Cube either. So there's like, and obviously all the like OFAC countries. So I think it's pretty similar. If you do KYC, most of the people do it in pretty similar way by using like external vendors that handle all of that, and then it's just a question like which countries do you think you can operate from?
And then you mentioned that the order book is centralized; it sits within your servers. As you said, and I think that's how DYDX basically currently operate on the ETH2. When they move to their own app chain, I think that they're trying to bring it all on chain. Correct me if I'm wrong. What are the benefits and what are the dangers of having an order book off chain?
Um, so there is always this like question: hey, did you match my trades correctly? Did you follow the process? Did the exchange front run the trades? Did you favor others like market makers? Like, did you give them faster connectivity? Like things like that. And we have a couple of proposed solutions where we counter those problems, like timestamping on the switches, order verification with like signing and things like that. That like effectively the decentralized part of Cube can verify that the centralized part operates as promised. But still be centralized for the purposes of like throughput and latency of trading.
Can you can we talk a bit about I guess the market landscape, because I think things are changing a lot, especially one, just the fact that ever since CZ stepped down, it feels like Binance is losing market share. You have you guys, Cube has emerged, Backpack is emerging, and then obviously the APAC exchanges are continuing to do well. Your OKXs of the world, and then on the US side, you have Coinbase kind of dominating with their suite of products, and they're powering the custody side of all these ETFs and so on and so forth. I mean, how do you guys think about competitive dynamics here and how this is all play out in the next few years or so?
Yeah. So the obviously I want to grow this to be as big as Coinbase or Asian exchanges in terms of volume. And I think a lot of those like let's call it like legacy exchanges, they centralized exchanges, they did a lot of work that brought a lot of users to the space. And I think that's like actually the hardest work that you can do. Like you're taking a user that doesn't know anything about crypto and educate them. Right now, Coinbase has around 77 million registered users that like traded on the exchange. And I think from the competition perspective, this like at top of the funnel. You have like users that are primed educated about crypto, and then it's just around like, hey, like we actually have a better product that's like compliant and like it's easier to trade and more fun to trade and maybe more rewarding. It's like switching from one product to another is very different. Like convincing you like, hey, maybe you should stop using your horse and switch to a car is very hard. But to a different car brand might be easier.
Now, as far as the product, it does feel like you have the ability, just given the way you architected it, to allow users to not only tap into the order books and the centralized exchange infrastructure, but also potentially plug into DeFi itself. I mean, is that a part of the strategy here? Like, would you see Q potentially powering users' abilities to trade, for instance, like newly launched meme coins, or do you want to have some guardrails in place?
I want people to like so like in terms of trading on the centralized venue, I think it will always have a bit more guardrails in terms of like what you can trade and how markets are launched and all of that. That being said, we definitely have on our roadmap the ability to interact with like on-chain protocols, and those obviously have like wild variety of options, right?
But how do you think it's going to play out? Because do you think that the majority of people are going to want to stay on centralized exchanges long term? Because I suppose historically, the real threat, if you like, was that you lose all of your coins, that they're holding all your coins and now they're gone. And so everyone's been sort of pushed onto decentralized solutions. So do you think that that's the real problem? That's what was driving people to DEXs. And therefore, if you can have this sort of hybrid model, which is also going to be super, super fast, then that's sort of the perfect end game, if you like. And that's where the majority of people are going to move. Or do you think that centralized exchanges are almost like a stopgap moment in time? And in 10, 20 years, everyone is just going to be onboarded straight to chain and straight to a sort of more traditional DEX?
I think it really depends on the regulation and where it goes in different countries. So Cube, in a sense, is some bet on like where we think the regulation will go. It's very tricky to run fully integrated company. I think that's not regulated. And what I mean by that is you have, let's say, a protocol that's on chain and a website that you market to people, go and use that. And that's like, in many cases, it's pretty simple point. Like, hey, you actually have these people that deploy this website on the centralized internet infrastructure. They own the domain, they own this, like, and they actually market it. Like it's, and I think like this is really where like the competition will like occur. Like it's like let's say Uniswap needs to be more regulated or DYDX needs to be more regulated because they are viewed like you're operating this website and you are clearly benefiting from the efforts of running this. Like you need to be regulated. I don't know if that will happen. I don't know if like the regulators will decide the other way. I think the verdict still stands on that, and like, but that will happen like globally in every single country. On KubeFront, like we believe that the front end part of things will be more regulated, where the protocols will be more open source and decentralized, either with like open access or more limited access. And like we are building for that specific state of the future. But obviously, nobody knows where we end up, and people are making different bets.
And then can you also go into, so I think at the moment, Binance has the vast majority of trading in all of crypto, DEXs and CEXs. Maybe it's 78 to 80% of total volume, something completely mental like that. So it seems to me that the main reason is because you get super low latencies. You're not paying fees on all of the transactions. Are those the main advantages? It'd just be good if you could just go into why most traders currently operate on Binance despite the custodial risks, and whether you think that the gap that DeFi, are pushing forward, whether that gap can be reduced, and whether we're going to start seeing more decentralized exchanges or hybrid exchanges more able to compete.
Yeah, so I think there's a number of reasons. Like from the finance perspective, liquidity brings liquidity. Like there's already a lot of people there When I have a token, like almost everyone would want to launch on Binance because that's like a lot of potential customers that you can like bring awareness to your project. From pure technical perspective, I think they actually build pretty good product. It's like really robust and like much more stable than what you see in most of the other crypto exchanges in terms of like maintenance periods and things like that. So like very good team. I know some of it might be unpopular opinion, but like it's like how I kind of think about it. And then in terms of DEXs, like why do people trade less on DEXs? I think on perpetuals and derivatives, you can use more leverage. On spot, I think it's a bit more complicated, and some of it is related to bridging assets and like trading native assets. Like when I think of Bitcoin, ETH, and Solana, even just like three main tokens, you actually on Binance you trade them natively. But if you wanted to trade Solana on Uniswap, it would be some form of like wormhole wrapped Solana, and I don't know if anyone would want to actually hold it. Like, do you know a single person in Solana ecosystem that would want to trade Sol that's wrapped on ETH? And I think the feeling is mutual across all the chains. Like if I want to hold ETH, I want to hold ETH on Ethereum. And if I want to hold Bitcoin, I actually want it to be on Bitcoin network. And centralized exchanges enable that. And I don't know if that sentiment from traders would ever change, right? And like I think that's like unless you are building something that's like similar to like 4chain or something that like allows you to trade across multiple chains with like a version of RFQs and whatnot. I think it's a pretty tricky value proposition that like to hold wrapped Bitcoin or wrapped ETH or wrapped Sol on through some technology that like you don't necessarily know what it is.
Can you tell us a bit about the story that led you to where you guys are today? Meaning, it feels like this is kind of a response to FTX, Cube, and the way you guys are building it is in a way like it would have prevented that from happening. But tell us about the details. You know, what does it take to actually start a centralized exchange, which in my view is probably the hardest business to start in crypto, just from the legal standpoint, the technology that's needed to make that all work, the team you'd have to build, and so on and so forth. Just walk us through that journey.
Yeah. So yes, 100%. This is like probably one of the hardest things that you can do in crypto. Another one being starting like a new layer one. And I didn't take that lightly. I actually, when I started in crypto first, I was thinking about like building an exchange as well, like around like me starting at Solana, and decided against it, just because of how crowded the space was and like the value proposition was not very clear at the time. I think like FTX was winning, people were excited about it, and like things like that. But after FTX, I think a lot of things changed, at least in my mind. First one being, I was just not happy with the state of exchanges. Just like the fact that, like yet again, you know, in 2022, right? We have like another, let's call it a hack or a breach of trust at the exchange, that like nobody saw coming, right? And it happened like every few years in crypto, starting with like Mt. Gox and like all of that. And like every time when there's like a new exchange, like it's potentially a response to that hack, and they get better and better. And I thought, you know, with FTX it will be like the last cycle of that, but like I was clearly wrong. So that's like in terms of framing, and like immediately when things were happening, and I was in Portugal during Breakpoint, I actually didn't have access to FTX. I lost a bunch of money on it. So like personally was not happy, but I knew a lot of people that lost like many more thousands that I did. And it felt like it was just wrong. Enough about that. So then we came back to Chicago, sat down with Larry in front of the whiteboard, and like, what would we want to change? And like the first thing was like, okay, like the MPC infrastructure and how the assets are segregated. We started toying with the idea how it could be built. Spent probably a month or two prototyping that between two of us, and then started like, hey, this looks like it can be done, which like at the beginning, we were not very sure if it could be done in an economical way that actually achieved all the criteria that we wanted in terms of throughput and latency. And once we verified that, we started building a like larger team of like engineers, lawyers, operations people, all of that. And yeah, at that point, it just turned into a company. So you need to build a great team to build a great product.
And on the legal front, what markets did you guys start with, and how onerous is that process? I think it's a bit of a mystery to a lot of outsiders, like how that all works, the licensing and everything.
Yeah. So each country has its own, like or most of the countries have their own regulation. Sometimes it's lightweight, sometimes it's much more heavy. I think so. The first question that you look at is like, hey, do we need a license in this country, and why? The second one that usually comes up in most of the countries is, do you allow people to deposit fiat to your exchange? Usually when you interact with fiat, you have more requirements, like, and versions of money transmitter licenses. You need to sign up banks and all of that. And then you need to look at their view of like digital assets in general, like where do they fall? Or do they think of them as like just property, derivatives, something else? And it's like really country by country evaluation. Right now, for Cube at least, things are on some front easier. We're in a sense that we are digital asset only venue, so you cannot you don't have a linked bank accounts effectively, and you cannot deposit fiat. We use Banksa as a vendor to allow people to deposit fiat if they want to, and that made some things simpler in some countries. And that's how Binance started as well. They started as like digital only, and then they started adding fiat. The fiat in my mind is pretty tricky. Also from the philosophy perspective, right? Because like there's no way to do MPC on a fiat bank account. So before we go there, I really want to figure out with like the right partner how something similar to MPC can be built on the banking front, where Cube itself does not have customers' bank accounts.
So just to clarify though, so if you're using banks, you're saying people turn fiat into USDC, then that gets deposited, right? Because there's no way to hold US dollars or some or whatever fiat currency we're talking about. And is there? I've always been curious. Are there like limitations with using vendors like Banksa, like on the deposit side, like deposit size limits or anything like that?
Yeah. I think most of it is driven by regulation. So you'll have like daily limits, weekly limits, monthly limits that are driven by different countries on both withdrawal and deposits. And depending also on the type of like source that you use. If you use like credit card, it will be lower. If you use like Swift, it will be higher. But like yeah, it's a fairly complicated, landscape to be a payment gateway.
Can you just go into high level how MPCs are working and why they were the best solution for this?
Yeah, so the easiest way to compare MPC, I think, so the MPC is fairly esoteric for a lot of people. It overlaps in some sense with like zero knowledge proofs. So it's pretty tricky to like understand from the outside perspective. The thing that's most familiar to people is multi-sig. So on Solana, a lot of people probably use like squats, similar products on Ethereum and Bitcoin, where with multi-sig they can secure their assets. The difference between MPC and a multi-sig is usually blockchain dependent. So each blockchain, like Ethereum, Bitcoin, Solana, they will have different implementations of multi-sigs. Sometimes they are implemented directly on the layer one. Sometimes they are implemented as a smart contract on the layer one. And the way it will work is you connect your private key, and you can sign up to specific threshold that's configured in the multi-sig or like the multi-sig rules to sign the transaction. And some like on some blockchains it's like very easy, on some it's harder and more expensive. So instead of using multi-sigs, MPC, we decided to use MPC because it's like pure cryptography and it's not blockchain dependent. So it allows you to create the private key for the user in a distributed way. So the private key doesn't exist at any single point of time during the creation, but also during signing. And basically, when you execute transaction, there's multiple people that compute the signature together. But that signature, like that computation process, doesn't use any private key at the given, like doesn't hold the private key in any computer at any given point in time. So it makes sure that there's no like parties that can steal that private key. Yeah, so like that was one of the reasons I really wanted to avoid being blockchain dependent and having a smart contract risk.
Does it help with key recovery as well?
Yes, so you can recompute points on the curves as well, and you can have more complex rules around it. So, if you are, for example, if you hold a lot of money and you are VC, in many cases you would be using something like Fireblocks, and Fireblocks behind the scenes is using MPC, so it's considered really like a gold standard of like what you could be doing with security. And I wanted to make sure that we can bring it to each individual person really at zero fee, built directly into the exchange, which I think is like a big value proposition, and hopefully improves the like security in the space in general.
How does recovery work exactly from the user perspective? And are there any like potential attack vectors there?
Yeah. So the way we have it structured right now is Cube has two levels of threshold signatures in the MPC infrastructure. So the first one at the bottom one is a majority of the MPC guardians sign on a specific message. And then the second level is it's the majority of the guardians, and it's either exchange or the user that decides to do the action. So like when you are going to do key recovery, what would happen is the exchange would verify for the user KYC and would pass that information to the guardians and say, hey, this user re-KYC'd again. Let's regenerate the keys for them.
And you're saying they're doing KYC again, meaning they like show their ID or their face or something like that. Okay, gotcha.
And we use the third-party vendor for that, and then the guardians would communicate with that vendor, like, hey, is this a proper KYC that passed? So that the exchange itself is not deciding, oh, like regenerate the keys for this user.
Okay, got it. And maybe just tell us a bit philosophically about like the trade-offs between MPC versus something like a smart contract wallet, where I think the key risk, at least as far as I see it, is that it comes down to who implements the MPC architecture. Like that's where all the risk is. Whereas smart contract wallets, to your point, they're chain specific, so it's very hard to like. You basically need an implementation for every single blockchain to be adopted by the layer one, and so that takes forever. All these organizations are moving at different paces, and so theoretically that's more open source and more secure in a way, but it'll be a longer time to get there. I mean, is that kind of how you see that, or are there any other nuances here?
So like I plan, to open source the infrastructure that we have for MPC. So I don't. And in terms of like multisig, it's really just like the way you interact with each blockchain is just different, right? Like, and on some of them, you cannot build smart contracts. Like let's take Bitcoin. The way to do multisig in Bitcoin is just very different. So you'll always end up with this like idiosyncratic properties of the using multisigs, and in many cases they are more expensive. So I think it's a trade-off. I think they're great for certain things, but I think if you want to integrate with multiple blockchains, it's becoming very tricky. If it was only on Solana, I would say like, yeah, sure, let's do multisig. The only concern, I guess, on Solana would be like the size of the transactions and maybe cost of the transaction being a bit higher if you are using multisig. But like the cool part, like really at least from technical perspective, in my opinion, the cool part about MPC is the fact that from the blockchain perspective, it's indistinguishable, right, like from like normal signature. It's all cryptography and it feels like magic. But to your point, yes, it's heavily dependent on who built it. But it's kind of the same with multisigs, like,
Yeah, in a way, yeah.
Like multisigs got hacked too.
And so the reason you guys wanted to go with your own proprietary implementation, I'm guessing it comes down to just minimizing costs for the user, right? Versus using a vendor. To your point, you mentioned Fireblocks is used by a lot of companies out there, battle tested in a way.
Yep. Yeah, I think it would be, for us at least, it would be prohibitively expensive to integrate that natively into the exchange layer.
And whilst we're on technical chat, the other part which really interests me is, as I understand it, you've forked the SVM. Is that correct? And so you're effectively, should I think of it as like almost like an alt EVM chain, like I don't know, an avalanche or something from last cycle, something like that? Is that effectively what you've created?
I think you can think of it as upchain, right? Like I'm trying to avoid frequently like calling it L2 because right now it's not really secured by the by let's say Solana on the blockchain. It could be, and I think we have a couple of ideas there. But end of the day, I didn't want it to rebuild all the great work that Solana did on the validator client, and with Fire Dancer coming and like other clients coming out there as well, I think it gives us a lot for free. And if we need to customize it, we can. But it's like, I guess laziness. That's how I would describe it. Like I want to build a great exchange, not the like L1.
Yeah. I'm sure many builders completely concur with that. I think it's really interesting as well that it's not just yourselves, but Pith and MakerDAO were also discussing the same idea of forking the SVM. Do you imagine over, say, the next 3 to 5 years that there are going to be a load of projects forking the SVM? And connected to that, do you think that Solana is going to start building up an app chain community potentially? And what would it need to do that? Is it allow settlement to the L1 and DA? Is that how you would create this app chain ecosystem?
Yeah, I think so. I think like there's more and more teams that I think as soon as you build, I think very successful product, like let's take Pith that has a lot of like volume, you will start thinking, okay, like what do I do to make sure I'm not impacted by the usage on the chain? I think that's like kind of like fairly straightforward. And I think the main thing that we would need to figure out is an equivalent of like IBC really in Cosmos for all those like chains to communicate with each other, but also for wallets to make sure that that infrastructure is just better. I think like one thing that Solana did really well is it's simple to use for anyone, and I think having more chains might make it hard, right? Like Pith and what Cube has is technically not exposed directly to the users of like Phantom, you don't connect there, so it doesn't create that problem. But like as soon as you expose like an app chain where people can deploy smart contracts and interact with the wallets, it's like how like you need to solve a lot more problems.
Talk to us a bit about the business strategy as you guys kind of look forward to the next 1 to 5 years. I think what we're seeing is from other centralized exchanges, expansion into new businesses. Coinbase obviously built a big business on just custody. They have the wallet as well, and trying to tap more into like the Web3 developer ecosystem, and even just Magic Eden a few days ago announced that they built a wallet. So it feels like expansion is happening at various levels here from these OG players. Do you guys think about potentially like even for instance turning the MPC implementation you have into like an API product that other people could use? Like, how do you guys think about new venues to tap into?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we talked about it internally, but the main thing that I want to focus on is uh, building the best exchange out there. And I think as soon as you start talking about like, hey, we will build, this API for people to use MPC, or maybe we'll build like our own wallet, or like anything else, right? It's like you end up fragmenting the team and maybe losing a bit of focus. um, I think it's doable when you're much bigger. Like at this stage, we are pretty small. The engineering team is, like less than few people. Uh, like adding more things on that plate will result in like the exchange being, somewhat neglected, and like that's not what I want. Um, I want to make sure that we can move fast on adding new like financial products, making like matching engine faster, building like perpetuals, all of the things that you would expect from the exchange, like custom algos. Like I don't know if you guys saw like how we did the gorilla jump, like improving and innovating on that front rather than um, like in many cases I need to stop myself, right? So like I'm a developer by heart, and it's much easier to start new products and get excited about them than like scale the one that you have. Like it would be very easy, like, hey, we built this great infrastructure for MPCs, like let's switch to that and like improve that, build documentation around that and all of that. But I'm very cautious.
How do you guys think about like go to market customer acquisition in a world where seemingly every degenerate on chain is expecting points or some sort of compensation for using your product? I mean, certainly on the, let's say, on chain world, DeFi, NFT marketplaces, things like that. How do you guys think about that? Is that something that's top of mind, or are you more focused on just building a robust centralized exchange platform?
Um, I think rewarding early users is extremely important. Like they are the people that will tell you what works, what doesn't, and they had the courage to try the product first when nobody wanted, and put their money at risk. So I don't view it as a negative. Like that's like one great part about the crypto space in general, that like you can actually reward your early users, right? Like I had the first iPhone when it came out, and I had the first Android phone when it came out. I think for Android it was like G1 developer device, and I didn't get anything for it. Like I built Android apps, iOS apps, and like contributed to the growth of the App Store in some sense. Um, and there was no airdrops.
Well, hopefully you got the first Solana phone though. So
Yeah, so Solana phone obviously is great, but it's like disrupting that mentality that like how do you, like your early users are your like biggest advocates, right? Like I'm sure if you used originally Airbnb when it was like kind of cool and fun, you're telling all your friends like, hey, use Airbnb, and you didn't get anything for that.
I think one area where you've really shone, it came across in your breakpoint presentation, is just the UI of the whole application really looks incredible, and anyone who hasn't tried it should definitely check it out. It feels like you've done a load of work on that. Is that partly because of your TradFi experience, or are you Are you trying to innovate on the trading interface side of things? How are you thinking about just making this completely different to every other exchange out there?
Yeah. So yes, we are trying to innovate on the UX and UI of the exchange itself. I think it's disappointing that if you open all the like existing exchanges, like it's almost impossible to tell the difference, right? Like maybe the only difference is like, oh, Coinbase has a white theme and everyone else has a black theme, and they look like almost the same. And I think we could do better. Like I think that the competition in that space is exciting. So I'm actually like super excited to see what people like will copy from what we built and like how we can compete on that front. Like one little thing that we added was like the bundles. I think people kind of like them. So I can't wait to see when someone else will copy that and like start pushing on that front. Same with the algos. I think the algo infrastructure could be much better and more robust. And in general, the interfaces could be better.
Yeah, I think the bundles are. I really like how you've sort of named them after people in the Solana ecosystem, as far as I can tell. I think it's a nice touch, and it's good to see centralized exchanges trying to bridge over as much as possible with the native crypto community. So I think that's a really awesome move.
One question I had was just as far as like constructing a team for such a global market, especially one where I think a lot of trading activity happens in the APAC region. Whereas, I sit in the US, you're in Chicago. How do you kind of monitor the pulse of what's happening in those markets and ensure you're covering that ground versus exchanges that are based there, like OKX or Binance or things like that, that might be more close to those users?
Yeah. So the team that we have is distributed. We have people in Hong Kong, Australia, in Europe. At the same time, most of the engineers are collocated in Chicago, and like I'm being very deliberate about it. So I think it's very hard to build engineering culture remotely. I tried, during COVID for a couple of years, and it was super hard. So I kind of like swung the opposite way. For engineering talent, like I will very rarely make exceptions for not being in the office like every day. Like we are sitting back to back and coding, and it's just like such a different experience from what you would see like just hopping on the Zooms and talking over Slack. People are excited to come to work and like work on the same product together. And then like go out together, like have drinks and like just dinner and things like that, like every few days. And I'm super proud of the team, I guess. But like it's like maybe opposite to like Web3 ethos, where you're like, hey, like you can be all anonymous and like all around the world. I think it works in some respects, but having a collocated team of engineers is like so much more productive.
We're recording this on Tuesday, 30th of Jan. Jupiter was dropping tomorrow, so I'm just wondering, are you doing anything in particular to prepare for that? I saw you had a tweet about talking about ever wanted to go to space.
Yeah. Obviously, we'll have Jupiter trading on day one. I knew the team from very early days when they were still called Mercurial. I don't know how long you guys been on Solana. So like amazing team, obviously, great product. Have been using it from the like day one when they launched. And obviously they have been doing great job with like community building and like building excitement towards their airdrop. So super excited that we get to participate in that. I hope like we'll have fun rewards around that as well. Like you said, it's all about the rewards right now in the exchange space. So we'll cook something fun. That's how I think about it.
Well, Bartosz, we covered a wide variety of topics, dove super deep into Cube and what you guys are cooking up. Any closing thoughts or things to look forward to on your end as we continue into 2024?
Try the product. Send me your feedback. For most of the things that people send me, we release the changes the same day or next day. Super excited to talk with people that are using the product, but separately what I have been doing technically for years, and not many people know about it. If you're building a product on Solana or any other blockchain, I'm always happy to hop on the Zoom call and chat about the ideas, how I think about like building the team, and what matters. And sometimes having that sounding board makes the world of difference. So don't hesitate to reach out.
Amazing. Well, super appreciate you coming on and looking forward to what you guys continue to build.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.